Imagine standing in the middle of a bustling city street, your heart pounding as a stranger shoves past you without a word. Anger flares, a storm ignites inside your chest, yet before you can shout or lash out, a thought pierces the heat of emotion. Do I really want this? Most of us, caught in the immediate whirlwind of sensation, would erupt, words, gestures, and consequences spilling uncontrollably. Yet, consider the power of a pause, a measured step back from the instinct to react. What if, in that fleeting silence, we held the key to an inner dominion that no external force could ever seize? Our lives are littered with these moments. A colleague's careless remark, a driver cutting you off, the subtle slights that sting more deeply than any overt attack. Each instance triggers an almost mechanical response, a jolt of adrenaline followed by words or actions that we later regret. The unsettling truth is that our reactions are not merely expressions of who we are. Often, they are chains forged by habit, social conditioning, and unexamined fears. By reacting impulsively, we surrender our freedom, handing over authority to fleeting impulses. Carl Jung once observed, "Every form of addiction is bad, no matter whether the narcotic be alcohol or morphine or idealism." Here lies a profound psychological paradox. The habit of reacting is an addiction to immediate emotional gratification. Each time we respond without reflection, we feed the pattern, deepening its hold, while losing touch with the deeper part of ourselves capable of discernment. Reaction is easy, reflection is hard. And yet, it is within that hardness, that conscious refusal to surrender to instinct, where true power emerges. Picture a life in which every provocation becomes an opportunity to cultivate mastery over oneself. The stranger who shoved you is no longer an enemy to be fought, but a mirror revealing your internal state. The insult that once would have seared your pride now becomes a test, a chance to exercise restraint, to step outside the tyranny of reflex. Each pause, each moment of non-reaction, is a subtle rebellion against the chaos of modern existence, a reclaiming of sovereignty over the one territory no one else can govern, your mind. Yet, this is not merely a matter of self-restraint or moral virtue. There is an almost alchemical transformation in observing emotion without immediate response. Nietzsche hinted at this when he wrote, "He who has a why to live can bear almost any how." The why, in the context of emotional mastery, is the awareness of choice, the conscious realization that you are not bound to your impulses. By refusing to react, you create space to discern, to understand, and to respond with intentionality rather than reflex. Each non-reaction is a silent assertion of freedom in a world that constantly seeks to provoke and ensnare us. The urgency of this practice becomes clearer when we consider the cumulative weight of reactions over a lifetime. A single outburst might seem trivial, but the chain of unexamined responses shapes character, relationships, and destiny. Every moment surrendered to reaction is a moment in which we lose ourselves, fragment by fragment, to the external world. To resist this pull is to step onto a path of profound self-mastery, an endeavor that is both terrifying and exhilarating. In this light, controlling one's reactions is not about denial, suppression, or cold stoicism. It is a radical engagement with reality. It is learning to navigate the storm of human experience with a steady hand, to see the triggers and impulses for what they are, and to choose a response that aligns with one's higher self. And yet, the question remains, how does one cultivate this capacity in a world that rewards immediacy, outrage, and emotional spectacle? How can the mind, trained by years of habit, be rewired to resist its own instincts? The answers begin not in theory, but in practice, a deliberate confrontation with the self, and a commitment to the power of not reacting. Every reaction is a story we tell ourselves about reality, yet it is often a story written by someone else entirely. Our upbringing, society, even evolutionary survival mechanisms. The instant flash of anger or fear is not a signal of authenticity, but a programmed response designed to protect the self, sometimes at the expense of reason, relationships, and long-term well-being. Consider the paradox. The very instincts that once ensured survival in the wild now sabotage our modern lives, leaving us trapped in cycles of overreaction, regret, and guilt. Neurologically, this is no accident. The amygdala, a primitive part of the brain, acts as a sentinel, alerting us to threats with a surge of chemicals that hijack rational thought. In these moments, the mind becomes a battlefield, caught between the impulsive commands of emotion and the measured deliberations of reason. Most surrender to the amygdala. Few recognize the power they hold to intervene. This is not a simple act of willpower but a sophisticated psychological skill, requiring awareness, practice, and an understanding of our internal architecture. Arthur Schopenhauer wrote, "Compassion is the basis of morality." While he referred primarily to ethical behavior toward others, there is a deeper resonance here. Compassion for oneself is the foundation of emotional mastery. Reacting impulsively often springs from a place of unacknowledged pain or insecurity. By cultivating awareness, by observing the surge of emotion without immediately acting, we create a form of inner compassion, acknowledging the discomfort without letting it dictate behavior. This is not weakness. It is the conscious exercise of strength. To practice non-reaction, one must first recognize the triggers. They are often subtle. A tone of voice that feels condescending, a glance that seems dismissive, a pattern of microaggressions that slowly fray patience. Our instinctive responses are amplified by past experiences, by old wounds that reactivate at the slightest provocation. The moment of recognition, the instant when you sense the first twitch of anger or defensiveness, is the critical hinge. Pause here. Observe the feeling as if it were a passing cloud, not a command. This pause is deceptively simple, yet it contains the seeds of transformation. Jean-Paul Sartre observed, "Freedom is what you do with what's been done to you." Every emotional trigger is a challenge to exercise this freedom. We cannot control the external world. People will provoke, injustice will occur, setbacks will strike. But we can control our inner response. In that space between stimulus and reaction lies the real power. The opportunity to choose, deliberately and consciously, how to engage with reality rather than being swept along by it. Practically, cultivating this space begins with attention. Mindfulness, journaling, or even brief reflective pauses throughout the day train the mind to recognize emotional impulses without immediate engagement. Each practice is a rehearsal for the bigger tests, the moments of intense provocation that would normally trigger instinctive outbursts. Over time, these small interventions strengthen the neural pathways that allow reason and awareness to override automatic reaction. What once felt like an uncontrollable fire becomes manageable, and eventually, a source of personal authority. This is not a path for the faint-hearted. To resist reaction is to face one's own vulnerabilities, to confront the habitual self that thrives on instant gratification and emotional certainty. It is, in essence, a confrontation with the raw truth of human nature, that we are often enslaved by forces within ourselves, and that liberation comes only through awareness, patience, and deliberate choice. Each practice, each pause, each refusal to act on impulse is a quiet rebellion against the tyranny of instinct, a rebellion that reshapes the very architecture of the mind. And yet, knowing the mechanics of reaction is only the beginning. Understanding why we react opens the door, but walking through it requires concrete strategies, sustained attention, and the courage to embrace discomfort. The next stage of mastery is learning not only to pause, but to redirect the energy of emotion, transforming potential chaos into clarity, strength, and insight. This is where theory becomes action, and action becomes transformation. The pause, the fleeting fraction of a second between stimulus and response, is deceptively small yet infinitely powerful. It is here, in this imperceptible space, that the trajectory of our lives can shift. Imagine a heated argument. Words clash like swords, tensions spike, and instinct screams for immediate retaliation. Most will lunge forward, reacting reflexively. Yet, if one can breathe, if one can inhabit that pause fully, the energy of conflict can be transformed into insight, clarity, or even reconciliation. This is the art of emotional alchemy, turning the raw material of instinct into the refined substance of deliberate action. Viktor Frankl, reflecting on the human capacity for choice under the most harrowing conditions, wrote, "Between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space lies our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom." This is no mere platitude, it is a fundamental psychological truth. The pause is the gateway to autonomy, the point at which the chains of reaction can be loosened. Yet, cultivating this pause is not easy. It requires conscious effort, repeated practice, and, above all, self-honesty. One method to strengthen this capacity is what psychologists call emotional labeling. When a surge of anger, fear, or frustration arises, silently name it. This is anger, or this is anxiety. By labeling the emotion, you externalize it, creating distance between yourself and the raw impulse. The brain no longer experiences the emotion as an overwhelming command, but as an observable phenomenon. This simple act engages the prefrontal cortex, the seat of rational thought, giving you a foothold against the instinctive amygdala response. Over time, labeling becomes a reflexive buffer, a built-in pause mechanism that diffuses emotional intensity before it explodes into action. Another potent technique is reframing. Every provocation carries multiple possible interpretations. The driver who cuts you off may be reckless, or distracted, scared, or overwhelmed. The colleague's harsh words may reveal more about their insecurities than about you. By consciously exploring alternative narratives, you loosen the grip of automatic judgment and reduce the emotional charge. This reframing is not a denial of reality but an act of discernment, choosing which perspective will govern your response, rather than being hijacked by the first reactive interpretation. Equally important is the cultivation of breath awareness. The simple act of slowing the inhale and exhale has profound physiological effects, calming the nervous system and creating space for conscious choice. Ancient practices, from Stoic meditation to Eastern mindfulness traditions, emphasize breath as the bridge between body and mind, between impulse and reflection. In moments of high emotion, even a few controlled breaths can transform an impending outburst into a deliberate, measured response. Yet, these practices are most effective when paired with self-inquiry. Ask, what am I feeling? Why now? What do I truly want in this moment? These questions, simple in appearance, penetrate deeply. They illuminate the hidden patterns of reaction, exposing vulnerabilities, unresolved pain, and habitual thought loops. The more one interrogates the root of impulses, the more one can reclaim the territory of choice that has long been ceded to unconscious habit. The mastery of non-reaction is thus both art and discipline. It is not passive restraint but active engagement with one's inner world. Each pause, each breath, each reframing or label is a declaration of sovereignty. I am not compelled by instinct. I am the author of my actions. With sustained practice, the pause ceases to be a fragile experiment and becomes a steady, reliable instrument of self-mastery. It is a tool for navigating not only conflict but life itself, turning challenges into opportunities for growth, chaos into clarity, and reactive energy into deliberate power. When the pause becomes habitual, something extraordinary begins to happen. The mind reshapes itself. What was once reactive and turbulent becomes measured and purposeful. The energy of emotion, once a wildfire consuming thought and reason, is gradually redirected, like a river channeled into productive work. This transformation is not merely behavioral, it is existential, reshaping identity, relationships, and even perception of reality itself. Those who have cultivated this discipline often describe a profound sense of freedom, as though the world's provocations no longer dictate their inner state. Friedrich Nietzsche hinted at this when he wrote, "He who cannot obey himself will be commanded. That is the nature of living creatures." The habitual reactor is, in essence, a slave to instinct, to circumstance, to every flicker of external stimulus. By contrast, the individual who masters non-reaction becomes a sovereign presence, capable of observing the world without being ruled by it. Each interaction, each confrontation, becomes an opportunity to exercise judgment and wisdom rather than a battleground of ego and impulse. This transformation is psychological as much as philosophical. The habitual pattern of reaction ingrains neural pathways that reinforce impulsivity. Over time, the pause, the labeling of emotion, and deliberate reframing forge new pathways, strengthening the prefrontal cortex while reducing amygdala dominance. The mind becomes less a reactive machine and more a conscious instrument, capable of intentional responses even in moments of high stress. This is not a theoretical idea but a measurable neurological reality. Emotional intelligence is cultivated, resilience grows, stress becomes manageable rather than overwhelming. Emotionally, the consequences are profound. Relationships improve because reactive outbursts, defensiveness, and misinterpretation are minimized. Trust deepens and communication becomes clearer. When a partner, friend, or colleague provokes, the habitual non-reactor does not merely suppress anger. They see beyond the surface, recognizing needs, fears, and motivations that might otherwise be obscured. Compassion, both for self and others, emerges naturally, not as an imposed moral code, but as a lived reality grounded in awareness. There is also a philosophical dimension to this mastery. The refusal to react becomes an act of radical acceptance, an engagement with reality as it is rather than as we wish it to be. Aldous Huxley remarked, "There is only one corner of the universe you can be certain of improving, and that is your own self." By mastering non-reaction, we are indeed transforming the only domain truly under our control, the inner world. External circumstances continue to shift, but the inner response, once disciplined, provides stability, clarity, and even joy. The power of non-reaction extends to creativity, problem-solving, and decision-making. When the mind is no longer hijacked by immediate emotional impulses, it can perceive patterns more clearly, consider alternatives more deeply, and act with intentionality. What once seemed chaotic now reveals structure. What once provoked confusion now offers insight. Life itself, with all its unpredictability and turbulence, becomes a canvas upon which conscious choice is painted. Yet, the transformation is subtle, almost invisible to the casual observer. It does not announce itself with grand gestures or dramatic victories. It is the calm under pressure, the measured tone in a heated discussion, the ability to see a provocation and respond with clarity rather than reflex. Over time, this internal mastery radiates outward, shaping interactions, decisions, and even the trajectory of one's life. The external world may remain volatile, but the inner world becomes a fortress of self-possession, a sanctuary where freedom, wisdom, and power converge. Mastery of non-reaction is not an abstract virtue reserved for monks or philosophers. It is a practical tool for navigating the relentless turbulence of everyday life. Imagine the small irritations that punctuate our routines. The driver who cuts you off, the coworker who dismisses your ideas, the friend whose words sting unexpectedly. Each scenario presents a choice: surrender to instinct or step into the space between stimulus and response. Those who cultivate this pause quickly realize that their lives are no longer dictated by minor provocations. Instead, each challenge becomes an opportunity for presence, clarity, and deliberate action. Yet, the stakes grow higher in extreme circumstances. Conflict, injustice, and personal crises test the limits of emotional mastery. Viktor Frankl, reflecting on the unimaginable suffering of concentration camps, observed, "When we are no longer able to change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves." This is the essence of non-reaction. We cannot control every insult, betrayal, or disaster, but we can control our response. In doing so, we reclaim agency in situations where control seems impossible. The ability to observe without immediate reaction transforms crises from overwhelming forces into arenas for exercising courage, resilience, and discernment. In professional and social contexts, non-reaction is equally transformative. Negotiations, debates, and leadership challenges often provoke defensive reflexes. A habitual reactor may escalate conflicts, undermine credibility, or alienate colleagues. By contrast, the deliberate non-reactor maintains composure, listens deeply, and responds strategically. The energy once consumed by anger or frustration is redirected toward problem-solving, empathy, and clear communication. Relationships flourish not because provocations vanish, but because the responses to them are measured, thoughtful, and intentional. Daily life offers countless micro-practices that reinforce this skill. Pause before replying to an email that triggers irritation. Notice the first surge of frustration before speaking in a meeting. Observe the tightness in your chest during a disagreement and breathe through it. Over time, these small exercises accumulate, creating a resilience that is activated automatically when higher stakes arise. The mind learns to recognize habitual patterns, intercept impulsive reactions, and redirect energy toward conscious choice. What once required effort becomes effortless, a natural mode of engagement with the world. Emotionally, non-reaction fosters stability and clarity. Anger, disappointment, and fear no longer dominate perception. They become signals, not dictators. This emotional discipline allows one to maintain perspective in relationships, business, and personal challenges. Conflicts are resolved more efficiently. Decisions are made with greater precision. Internal peace is preserved amidst external chaos. Even profound setbacks, such as betrayal or loss, are met with a tempered mind, capable of reflection rather than destructive impulsivity. Philosophically, this practice aligns with the Stoic principle that we are responsible not for the world itself but for how we engage with it. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." Mastery of non-reaction embodies this truth. Life will continue to present provocations, frustrations, and suffering, but the individual who has cultivated pause, awareness, and deliberate choice navigates it with sovereignty. This is not detachment in the sense of indifference. It is engagement with the world from a position of inner freedom, guided by clarity rather than compulsion. Ultimately, applying non-reaction is an act of profound liberation. It transforms mundane irritations, interpersonal conflicts, and life-altering crises alike into opportunities for growth, reflection, and wisdom. The habitual reactor lives at the mercy of circumstance. The non-reactor commands the currents of experience, shaping outcomes not through external control, but through mastery of the self. To live without habitual reaction is to live in a state of profound freedom. This freedom is not external. The world will continue to provoke, disappoint, and challenge. It is internal, the sovereign domain of the mind, where stimulus no longer dictates response. Imagine standing in the midst of chaos, observing its currents without being swept away. Every insult, every crisis, every unforeseen challenge becomes an instrument through which your character is refined. The non-reactor experiences life not as a battlefield to survive, but as a landscape to navigate with clarity, choice, and purpose. Carl Jung once reflected, "I am not what happened to me, I am what I choose to become." This truth lies at the heart of non-reaction. Emotional impulses, past traumas, social pressures, all of these may shape the initial response, but they do not define the ultimate self. Each pause, each moment of observation before action, is a reclaiming of authorship. Life's provocations do not disappear, but the power to respond with wisdom rather than instinct transforms them into agents of growth rather than instruments of suffering. The existential implications are staggering. Humans are constantly faced with situations they cannot control, yet so often surrender their agency to emotional reflex. By mastering non-reaction, one steps into an arena of radical responsibility, not for external events, but for the internal life. As Jean-Paul Sartre observed, man is condemned to be free, because once thrown into the world, he is responsible for everything he does. Non-reaction does not absolve responsibility, it amplifies it. The decision to observe, to pause, to act consciously is a declaration of freedom within the otherwise uncontrollable flow of life. Emotionally, this mastery fosters resilience and serenity. The habitual turmoil of anger, resentment, or fear is replaced by a steady awareness. Relationships improve not because the external world has changed, but because the inner world is anchored. Challenges that once triggered panic or aggression are met with composure, allowing problem-solving and understanding to flourish. The non-reactor is not emotionally numb. They are emotionally sovereign, capable of engaging deeply without being dominated by sensation. Philosophically, non-reaction is an act of alignment with reality. It is the recognition that life unfolds according to forces beyond control, and that our power lies in conscious engagement with the present moment. Aldous Huxley phrased it with precision. Experience is not what happens to you, it's what you do with what happens to you. Each act of non-reaction transforms raw experience into intentional action. Life's unpredictability becomes a canvas for freedom rather than a cage of impulsive suffering. Finally, the mastery of non-reaction leaves a quiet legacy. Not a legacy of fame or material success, but of presence, wisdom, and dignity. It shapes the way others interact with you, the way challenges are faced, and the trajectory of personal growth. In cultivating the inner pause, one becomes a lighthouse amidst storms, a beacon of calm, clarity, and conscious choice. Life's chaos remains, but the soul navigates it with grace, turning instinct into insight and reaction into wisdom. Non-reaction is more than a skill. It is a philosophy, a discipline, and ultimately a way of life. It is the bridge from slavery to freedom, from chaos to clarity, from instinct to mastery. The power is not in controlling the world, it is in commanding oneself. And in that command lies the truest form of human liberation.